Okay, well, my name is Alan Howell, and I have lived in Mozambique for the last 12 years. Um, Mozambique is a Portuguese-speaking country, and so on our way to Mozambique, we stopped in Lisbon, Portugal, and lived there for about 9 months. And my language learning experience in Portugal was not great. I wasn't very good at language learning, and my language teacher would sometimes make fun of me and said that, Alan, you will eventually learn this language, but it will be like water through a hard rock, like slowly penetrating my skull. And so that was kind of depressing. But I tried, any ways that I could to learn language. My wife already knew Spanish, and so learning Portuguese was an easy shift for her. But I had to study, I had to use flashcards. I read Harry Potter in Portuguese, just anything I could to help me just have more exposure to Portuguese. Then moving to Mozambique, we started learning Makuameto, which is a very different language. It's kind of like Swahili, a Bantu language, completely different structure, vocabulary, everything totally different than English. And that was really, really hard to learn that language. And the culture is extremely different. And after a few years in Mozambique, I realized that the culture was becoming more familiar to me. There were certain elements that I felt like I was better at, like telling stories, and they love taking a long time to say anything. And so I had to learn to speak slowly and to draw out my conversations, like a fine wine, just to enjoy it and spread it out. I guess that's not a great example, but that's just one example of how it's different. And the way they think about time, the way they think about dependency and conformity, those are two big values that are very different than American values. And so a few years into the process, I was okay at speaking Makua after about 2 years. And then about 5 years into learning Makua, I started having some problems because I realized, I guess to give a little more background too, to make this discussion a little bit easier, my name is Alan, and in Portuguese there are no words in Portuguese that end with the letter N. And so Alan is kind of a problematic name, and so either people would chop off the N, which made me Allah, which is problematic for lots of reasons, or they would add an I on the end, and so I was Alani, and so people just didn't like my name at the very beginning. And so one of my friends at the very beginning said, okay, we're going to call you Arlindo, which is just like a Portuguese name that also starts with the letter A. And so in Mozambique, my name is Arlindo, and everybody knows me as Arlindo. People call me Arlindo, and only my closer friends just really know that my name is really Alan. And so I started to realize that the Mozambican side of my personality, Arlindo, would have some success in how he was dealing with Mozambicans. But if that part of me was the one who was working with our mission team or with an American-based context, there would sometimes be some problems. And so I was experiencing a lot of internal conflict between Arlindo, the Mozambican side of me, and Alan, the American side of me. And for a number of years, it felt like they didn't really get along and would kind of fight with each other. And there would be some days when I'd be out in the village or being with people, and Arlindo would feel great about taking all the time we needed to do any of the work we were doing. But Alan, the American time-conscious one, was ready to get stuff done and to move forward, and let's not mess around. Let's be efficient. And so Alan and Arlindo would have some conflict. And then even on our mission team, sometimes Arlindo would make compromises in situations with Mozambicans, and then that would get Alan in trouble with his team. And I kind of thought that I might be having a psychological disorder. But then a few years later, Alan and Arlindo have actually started getting along better, and they appreciate each other's gifts, and I feel like now I'm more of the same person. And one of the ways that one of my mentors has described it, he's described it as code switching, being able to go back and forth. Being bicultural means being able to switch codes and go back and forth from one culture to another. And the more fluid you can make that transition, the more bicultural you are. So we could think about that as a Mac and a PC and a program that can function on both, and having to make some code switches to function in either operating system. Another way that I've thought about it is in Mozambique we drive on the left side of the road. In America, we drive on the right side of the road. And the first few times where we would come back to the United States, it was difficult for me to remember which side of the road I was supposed to drive on. But the last couple times when we've come back to the United States, it's like something switches in my brain, and I just know that Alan is driving, and so it's on the right side. And so I feel like there's probably it took me about 5 to 7 years in the Mozambican context for our lean-do to really develop as a real part of my personality. And then it probably took another 2 or 3 years past that for me to have some reconciliation, have some peace, where Alan and our lean-do work together well and feel at home in the same head. So hopefully that doesn't make me sound like I've lost my mind.
So let me ask you, when did you first notice that our lean-do was developing?
I think I saw it more actually like in retrospect, like looking back on it. I think the times when I felt it the most usually revolved around conflict, where like maybe I was trying to work in the Mozambican context, but then I realized that I also had some American pressures or expectations that I wasn't able to meet because of my commitments to the Mozambican culture. And so really I didn't realize it was happening until there was like conflict surrounding it. And sometimes I didn't even notice the conflict. It was other people who would say, Alan, it seems like you're not being truthful to who you are or who we are, because you're giving in to the Mozambican culture. And so I think more it was in retrospect that I've seen how these two personalities have developed.
So as your language skills developed, and what was the name of the language again?
It's Makua Meto.
And that's a tribal language?
Yeah.
How proficient would you say you are?
One way that people talk about language proficiency is domain and like different domains, and there are definitely certain domains that I am really proficient in, and then there are others that I'm not great in. So like in Mozambican culture, men don't cook, and so my cooking vocabulary is not very developed. But my wife, Rachel, her cooking vocabulary rocks. I mean, she's really good, and she knows all those words. And so I have enough to get by in pretty much any situation.